The year Henry's family was on the verge of bankruptcy, my father made a deal with a marriage alliance and married me off to Henry. But I didn't know at that time that he already had a childhood sweetheart fiancée. Later, my father got involved in a scandal and the company was in a bankruptcy crisis. However, Henry brought his first love back home and said he would compensate her with a grand wedding. I didn't cry or make a scene, but just silently packed my luggage. Henry sneered and said, "Stop playing these petty games of playing hard to get. Do you still think you're the eldest daughter of the Arya family?" What he didn't know was that I still kept the divorce agreement he wrote after getting drunk. In 7 days, I will go abroad with my father. The day my father was sent to the overseas branch by the group, Henry brought back his just divorced first love. He came to my room and informed me expressionlessly, "Next week, I will let Isabella move in. I owe her too much these years. No matter what you think, you have to accept it." My father had just stepped down from the position of president after being involved in a workplace sexual harassment scandal. He couldn't even wait for a single day. I looked up at him. His eyes were as cold as an ice cellar in winter, without a trace of warmth. After 3 years of marriage, I had never been able to get into his heart. I hurriedly turned my face away to hide my heartache. Okay, anyway, I was leaving soon. It didn't matter who he wanted to bring home. Henry seemed a little surprised. His lips moved, but he didn't say anything in the end. He had always been a man of few words to me. After he left, I opened the safe and found a stack of papers under the jewelry box. It was the divorce agreement Henry wrote for me 3 years ago. It had his signature and fingerprint on it. As long as we got a certificate from the Civil Affairs Bureau, I would have nothing to do with him anymore. At a business dinner 3 years ago, I fell in love at first sight with Henry, who was outstanding in appearance. Less than 3 days later, his family sent a signal of intention to marry. I thought it was a predestined fate, until someone told me that Isabella was getting married. That day, Henry got dead drunk. I cooked him a sobering-up soup and brought it to the study. He was lying on the desk, his eyes red, and whispered, "Arya." My heart warmed, and I quickly walked over, but he grabbed the glass on the table and smashed it to the ground with glass shards flying everywhere. I was so scared that I trembled all over and took 2 steps back. The always gentle and refined Henry gritted his teeth and said, "Arya, it's all your fault. If it weren't for you taking a fancy to me, if it weren't for you having a president father, why would I be forced to marry you? Why would I have to watch Isabella marry someone else?" His tone was full of resentment. So it turned out that the happy marriage I thought of was just my wishful thinking. This feeling of pent-up anger stuck in my chest, neither going up nor down. It made my tears fall uncontrollably. Henry staggered to his feet, picked up a pen, and scribbled his signature and fingerprint on the divorce agreement. Then he threw that flimsy piece of paper to me. He said coldly, "I want to divorce you and marry Isabella home." He was so drunk that he even said such words. I held back my emotions, my voice trembling. "You're drunk now. Let's talk about it when you're sober." I bent down to pick up that piece of paper, turned around and went out, closing the door. Tears fell like beads with a broken thread. I went back to my room alone. The night wind was very cold, but it couldn't blow away my pain. The next day, after Henry sobered up, he returned to his polite manner. He didn't mention anything about Isabella, nor did he mention the divorce again. I pressed that divorce agreement to the bottom of the dressing table. I lied to myself that since Henry's first love had just gotten married, I still had a chance with him. But Isabella had an unhappy marriage. 2 months ago, Henry personally found the most professional lawyer to help her with the divorce lawsuit. Feeling sorry for her being alone, he brought her to Jiangqing to settle down. Now she was going to move into Henry's house. When I was counting my assets, Henry let Isabella in. When we got married, the dowry my father gave me was worth 80 million. Now I had to count each item carefully and turn it into cash to help my father's company through the crisis. When Henry pushed the door open, I turned off my phone and stood up. He said, "Isabella wants to live in this room. You move out." His tone was cold and not open to discussion. After getting married to Henry, he often worked overtime until late at night. He said he was afraid of disturbing my rest, so he specifically asked me to move out of the master bedroom, because this room was the closest to Henry's bedroom. The balcony was full of flowers, with roses he planted himself, and the swing from our wedding was still on the terrace. Isabella hid beside him, carefully looking around. Her envious eyes looked around. I looked up and refused him for the first time. No. The house is so big. There's no lack of places to live. Why does it have to be this room? She tugged at Henry's sleeve, looking a little aggrieved. Henry's face was gloomy, because Isabella likes it. These roses were originally prepared for her. So it turned out that this place had been prepared for Isabella from the beginning. Isabella smiled at me. Her smile was gentle, like the roses in full bloom on the balcony. I stared at her. Henry immediately protected her behind him and said in a cold tone, "You move out today. Be obedient and don't embarrass everyone." I lowered my eyes and said softly, "Okay." My father had lost his power and the company was in crisis. I had lost my biggest support. Henry no longer had to be polite to me. Before evening, I moved to a remote guest room. Then I took out the jewelry and bags Henry gave me and went to a luxury goods recycling store to sell them. I had bought a lot of things there before. So as soon as the SA saw me, he smiled and took me to the VIP room. I placed the items on the table one by one, and the diamond ring he gave me when he proposed caught my eye first. At that time, he was in a bankruptcy crisis and used all his savings to buy me this small and delicate ring. The second item was the Cartier bracelet he bought me after his company went public. The third item was the Tiffany necklace he gave me as an apology for his drunken indiscretion. At that time, I liked to wear this necklace to find him. The crystal pendant sparkled in the sun, and he would hug me with a smile. He said I was lively and lovely, different from those reserved girls. The SA opened his eyes wide and said, "These seem to be given to you by General Manager Henry a few years ago. Do you really want to sell them?" I said, "Yes." She carefully examined these jewelry and bags and finally gave me a price. I nodded in agreement and was about to leave after receiving the money. It was lively outside. Henry's doting voice came to my ears, "Do you like this necklace?" Isabella answered shyly, "Yes." Without saying a word, Henry swiped his card and bought it. When paying, he looked up at me, with a bit of surprise in his eyes. His eyes fell on my empty finger. The diamond ring that I never took off was gone. Henry put down his bank card, grabbed my hand, stared into my eyes and asked, "Arya, where's your ring?" I turned my head away to avoid his gaze and lied, "I didn't wear it." His face darkened and he gripped my hand even harder, which made me frown in pain. Isabella hurriedly grasped his wrist. "Henry." Only then did he seem to wake up from a dream and let go of my hand. Then he smiled at her in a daze. I lost my composure just now. I left alone under the strange gazes of the people around. On the 6th day before I was ready to leave, I was alone in the room counting the documents. My mother-in-law called me over and asked me to move out of Henry's house quickly. I declined politely, making an excuse that I still had things to do. She immediately changed her expression and scolded me, "You haven't had a child in 3 years of marriage. Don't you allow my son to find someone else?" I lowered my head and replied, "Of course you can. But your son needs to agree to divorce me first." What did Henry's marriage to his first love have to do with me? Anyway, the divorce agreement had already been signed. All that was left was to get the divorce certificate with Henry. I was too lazy to argue and perfunctorily blocked her words. On my way back to the room, I ran into Henry again. He was wearing a white shirt, looking handsome and upright. He was accompanying Isabella, having afternoon tea on the terrace. She was wearing the newly bought diamond necklace and smilingly pouring coffee for him. When she bent down, the necklace refracted brilliant light in the sunlight. The steaming hot coffee was poured into the bone china cup, and their eyes lingered in the hazy mist. He always said he was busy with work and stayed in the office all day. He had never accompanied me to do such things. I quickly turned around and walked back to the room quickly. My thoughts were in a mess. I couldn't concentrate on the documents in my hand at all. I fell in love with him at first sight when I was young, and it had trapped me for a whole 3 years. Now I finally realized that Henry was just putting on an act with me, while he was sincere with Isabella. I was in a daze staring at the documents until Secretary Victoria brought me the documents for the inventory of my assets. "Madam, it has been checked. Except for the part that was used to invest in the company, there are still a few pieces of jewelry missing." I suddenly looked up. "Which ones?" "My parents gave me too much dowry, and I couldn't remember them all," she said. "A diamond necklace, a wedding dress, a diamond necklace?" I remembered seeing it on Isabella's neck. I burst into Isabella's room. She was standing in front of the full-length mirror, trying on the wedding dress designed by my mother herself for me. Her wedding with Henry was in 6 days. It was too hasty. I guessed that Henry had already arranged everything secretly. Unexpectedly, she dared to put on that unique wedding dress. I was so angry that I trembled and rushed forward to grab the skirt of the wedding dress. Those delicate lace and pearl decorations were torn off by me and scattered all over the floor. I pulled the dress hard until the fabric made a tearing sound. She curled up in pain and was forced to bend down. "I'm sorry. I'll take it off right away." I held onto the wedding dress tightly and looked at her coldly. Isabella fell to the ground from in front of the mirror. The wedding dress was in a mess, with a large piece of the skirt torn and pearls and lace all over the floor. She looked extremely embarrassed, looking at me with teary eyes. "Miss Aria, if you want me to take it off, just tell me. Why did you use force?" I had a cold face and kicked her with my toe. "You stole my wedding dress and still dare to talk back." She just buried her head and cried, like a wronged little white flower. Suddenly, there were footsteps behind me. Henry rushed in with big strides, pushed me away and hugged Isabella into his arms. I staggered back 2 steps and subconsciously held onto the dressing table beside me to steady myself. The wedding dress in my hand slipped to the ground, and the fabric was already in tatters. He looked at me, his eyes full of disgust and strangeness. It seemed that I was a stranger he had never met before. "Aria," I said, "I just wanted to make up for the regrets of those years. Why are you making things difficult for her?" There was a fire burning in my chest, and I couldn't say a word. After a long while, I finally squeezed out a sentence. "That's the wedding dress designed by my mother herself." His voice was cold. "It's just a piece of clothing. What's the big deal if you lend it to her for a few days? Would you rather tear it up than lend it to others? Do you still think you're the eldest daughter of the Aria family? Enough is enough." I stood there. In the season of blooming flowers, I felt cold all over. Henry could always hit my sore spot with his words. The wedding dress couldn't be worn anymore. Isabella snuggled in Henry's arms, frowning. She looked at the damaged wedding dress with disgust. He comforted her softly. "Don't worry. I'll go and order a new one right away to make sure it can catch up with the wedding." I bent down to pick up the tattered wedding dress and left silently. My chest felt as if it was being gripped tightly, and the pain was almost suffocating. I just needed to endure for a few more days. Once the formalities were completed, I would leave. I exchanged most of my dowry jewelry and real estate for cash and saved it carefully. Henry ignored me all day until he came in the evening. He said that my father was transferred to the overseas branch and would leave in 3 days, and my mother would go with him. Henry stood by the door, with his back to the light, and his handsome face was hidden in the shadow. "Aria, if you hadn't married me, you would be a down-and-out daughter of a wealthy family by now." I said that Isabella and I are just going through the motions to make up for the regrets of those years. Your position as Mrs. Henry won't be shaken. I remained silent. If I hadn't fallen in love with him at first sight at that time, if our family had formed an alliance with other wealthy families in Jiangcheng, I wouldn't have ended up in such a situation and had to endure these humiliations. Seeing that I didn't speak, he took out a diamond ring from his pocket and threw it heavily on the dressing table. "You lied to me and secretly sold it." He emphasized the word lied very heavily, obviously very angry. I said faintly, "I sold it since I didn't want it anymore. It's no big deal." His brows furrowed tightly. "The secretary said that you've sold a lot of your dowry recently." He stared at me fixedly, his eyes burning. "You don't wear jewelry and don't see guests. What do you need so much money for?" I calmly met his gaze. "My father was transferred. The overseas journey is long and there are many things that need to be taken care of." This was indeed the truth. Henry then threw the things I had sold onto the dressing table one by one. The jewelry made a clear and crisp sound when they collided. He looked gloomy and said, "All the things I gave you have been sold by you. Aria, are you being petty with me?" I lowered my head to tidy up the necklaces and put them into the jewelry box. With a click, I closed the lid of the box. "I'll just take them abroad and sell them there. Anyway, he won't be able to control things that far away." I said softly. "No." I wasn't angry with him. I had already looked down on the things he gave me. Henry sneered, "Isabella is the one who I should have spent my whole life with. You have no right to be jealous of her." I replied numbly, "I know. Then let's get divorced." His true love is Isabella. They are a perfect match. He had repeated these words so many times that I was tired of hearing them. The room fell into silence. I continued what I was doing and folded the evening dresses one by one. When I go abroad, I won't have to wear such luxurious clothes anymore. Seeing that I was unusually quiet today, Henry's tone softened and he said, "Just leave these things to the servants." I perfunctorily curved the corners of my mouth and casually replied, "Okay." There were only 2 days left until Henry and Isabella's wedding. The villa was decorated festively, and even outside my remote room, I could see it as soon as I opened the window. On the red banners were Henry's handwriting, "Hold your hand and grow old together with you. Hope to win someone's heart and never part until our hair turns white." There were none of these when I married him 3 years ago. I looked out of the window. Isabella appeared at the end of the corridor. She was very happy today, with her eyes curved and a light step, walking towards here. The skirt of her white wedding dress was like a light cloud. She stopped in front of my room and said gently, "Miss Aria, what kind of necklace do you think I should choose for the wedding day?" She was wearing the wedding dress she had just tried on, and her hair hadn't been styled yet. She looked like an innocent girl. I said, "It's not your first marriage. Shouldn't you have experience? Why do you have to come and ask me on purpose?" Her expression froze and her face instantly turned pale. Her lips moved, but she couldn't say a word. Henry walked over from the corner of the corridor at some point with cold eyes. "Aria, you're also a woman. Why do you have to use the past to stimulate her?" "It's because Isabella wants to improve the relationship with you that she came to consult you on purpose." She was clearly showing off, but Henry couldn't see it. He only had eyes for her. I stood at the door and looked down at her. "Just wear whatever necklace you like." "Okay. I've answered you. You can leave now." Her eyes turned red and she took 2 steps back, weakly and helplessly leaning against Henry. Henry frowned and threatened me. "Aria, I can make your family's company never be able to turn around at any time." I looked at his face, feeling a bitterness in my heart. I stiffly curved the corners of my mouth and suddenly laughed with tears in my eyes. "Henry, you've already signed the divorce agreement." He sneered, "If it weren't for the wedding being so close, I would go and get the divorce certificate with you right now." He was used to saying mean things to me. He could say anything easily. I leaned against the door frame and silently watched them walk away. Isabella meekly held his hand, with a happy smile on her face. The crystal chandelier in the corridor cast a soft light on their side faces. They really were a perfect couple. I took a deep breath and after calming down my mood, I said to the servant beside me, "Get the car ready. Tomorrow, I'm going to the Civil Affairs Bureau." I went back to my room and took out the divorce agreement from the drawer, signed my name and put my fingerprint on it. All in one go. With the signatures and fingerprints of both parties, the formalities would be completed quickly. Now that the Aria family had fallen, it was only natural for Henry to want to break off relations with me. The staff at the Civil Affairs Bureau didn't ask many questions. I also moved my household registration back to my parents' home. By the time I finished dealing with everything and returned to the villa, it was almost noon. Tomorrow was the wedding, and the whole villa was bustling with activity. Therefore, no one had the time to pay attention to me. I went back to my room and sorted out the items I was going to take away. I packed 2 suitcases, had someone send them out of the villa first, and then sent a message to my parents. The flight was early tomorrow morning. The room had been cleaned up so cleanly that it seemed as if no one had ever lived here. In the evening, Henry's assistant brought me a dress. She lowered her head and said, "General Manager Henry asked me to bring this dress to Madam. The fabric was personally selected by the President 2 months ago. He said you could wear it when you attend the wedding tomorrow." The fabric was high-end custom-made silk, with a soft luster under the warm yellow light. The servant in the room took the dress. But she still didn't leave and stood at the door. "General Manager Henry asked me to tell Madam one thing." What he said yesterday was just angry words. Please don't take it to heart, madam. What he said was like water that had been spilled. My wounds were still aching faintly. I was silent for a moment and just nodded to show that I had heard it. She carefully looked up and asked softly, "Doesn't madam have anything to say to General Manager Henry?" The night wind was very cold and made my eyes feel astringent. I said slowly, "No. You can go back and report back earlier." She left quickly. That night, I tossed and turned and couldn't fall asleep. On the day of Henry's wedding, I got up very early. As soon as it was barely light, I changed into a low-key plain-colored dress and put on sunglasses before going out. The butler still recognized me and casually asked, "Miss Aria, where are you going?" "The wedding will start in an hour." Isabella was about to become Mrs. Henry, and it was already a certainty that I was divorced from Henry. To make a distinction, he called me by my full name. I just smiled and said, "I'm going to the airport to pick up my parents." "Don't tell Henry." He nodded and said, "Okay." I got into the car and drove towards the airport. The guests attending the wedding were all going in the direction of Henry's group villa, which was the opposite direction to mine. I put down the sun visor and stared blankly at my toes. 3 years ago, when I married Henry, we had a period of days when we treated each other with respect. At that time, I was too naive. I mistakenly thought that Isabella had already gotten married and that since he chose me, our marriage could be maintained. I naively believed that as long as I gave my sincere heart, I could get a response from him. Until a year ago, Isabella suddenly contacted him. After he married me, the performance of the Henry Group had been rising steadily, and its market value had multiplied several times. I loved him, and my father supported him. His career was going smoothly and he had a bright future. Even more high-spirited than when he succeeded in starting his business. However, his first love didn't have a good life. After marriage, her husband kept a mistress outside, and she lived in pain every day. Just a 25-year-old girl, she was physically and mentally exhausted and was getting thinner day by day. She couldn't help pouring out her feelings to her childhood sweetheart. Those messages expressing love and those tearful phone calls kept the two lovers apart. Fate played tricks on them. She should have been Henry's wife originally. They should have gone from school uniforms to wedding dresses. Because Henry felt guilty towards her, he resented me. So since then, Henry had been secretly helping her out while distancing himself from me. I thought, it was too late for me to realize my mistake now. An hour later, I got on the plane to go abroad. My parents knew that I had divorced Henry. They just sighed, regretting that they had misjudged the person and made me endure so much pain. I pursed my lips and didn't dare to speak. It was my own folly. I made one mistake after another. After a journey of more than 10 hours, we finally arrived at my parents' house abroad. I was originally worried that I wouldn't adapt to the new environment. But I was just sick for a few days due to the jet lag at first and then I got used to it later. Mom planted flowers and grass and fruit trees in the yard. The climate here was mild, and everything grew very well. Dad's position was rather marginalized, and most of his previous deposits had been frozen. Here, I lived a very relaxed and happy life. I could eat fruits that couldn't be bought in China and see sceneries that couldn't be seen in China. The sunshine and sea breeze here were so refreshing that I gradually fell in love with the life here. I slowly forgot about the past, and those bits and pieces of the time I spent with Henry had become blurred. The occasional tenderness, the rare joys. The long and lonely nights, the neglected waits. Everything had gone with the wind, as if it were in another lifetime. After coming back from the wedding of the son of Dad's friend, Mom held my hand, frowned and asked me, "I saw you were in a daze just now. Were you thinking of him again?" I was stunned for a moment and replied honestly, "I was thinking about how the steamed fish at the banquet was cooked. It tasted a bit different from what Mom makes." She burst out laughing. "I'll ask your dad to ask about it tomorrow." I hugged Mom's arm and rubbed against it coquettishly. It was a harmonious and happy scene. Before the wedding started, Henry stood in front of Aria's room door for a long time. He wanted to explain that this wedding was just to make up for his and Isabella's past in their youth. It was just to compensate Isabella. The words about divorcing Aria were said on impulse, and that wasn't his real intention. He just wanted her to understand that at this moment, she could only rely on him. He didn't know since when he had always hurt her with sharp words. At this moment, Henry was full of regret. He regretted saying those hurtful words and stabbing her heart again and again. Since there was no movement in the room, he asked the butler, "Where's Madam?" The butler thought he was asking about Isabella and replied, "Madam is putting on makeup." He said, "Okay." Yesterday, Henry had someone send a dress to Aria. It was customized by him 2 months ago. Whenever he saw delicate things, he would think of buying them for her. The light pink color suited her very well. He couldn't help smiling when he imagined how she would look in that dress. However, he didn't see Aria until the wedding started. His eyelids twitched, and he asked the butler again, "Where's Madam?" The butler lowered his head and replied with a trembling voice, "Madam went to the airport to see off Aria's father early in the morning." It was time for the wedding. Henry didn't care about Isabella behind him. He rushed into the guest room of the villa and pushed the door open. The room was so tidy that it made his heart palpitate, as if no one had ever lived here. Only that light pink dress was lying there quietly, intact as before. Henry's heart instantly plunged into the abyss, and he felt a tearing pain in his chest. She was really leaving him. Henry rushed to the garage, drove a sports car, and rushed out of the gate under the astonished gazes of the guests. Isabella staggered after him, with the skirt of her wedding dress dragging on the ground and her makeup smeared by tears. "Henry, please don't go." He was the groom and the protagonist of this wedding. How could the protagonist be absent from his own wedding? Moreover, this was the wedding he had been looking forward to for many years. So, he just watched helplessly as the car disappeared from his sight. His body slumped on the steps. They were thousands of miles apart abroad, and perhaps he would never see her again in the future. He covered his face with his hands, and tears slipped through his fingers. The painful sobs were heartbreaking. Everyone was startled. The assistant rushed over hurriedly. "General Manager Henry, what happened?" He couldn't say a word. Behind him, above the villa, the fireworks prepared one day in advance burst out in the blue sky. This was supposed to be his happiest moment. But Aria had already left. His mind went blank, and he finally understood. Isabella was just an obsession he couldn't let go of in his youth. He had always thought that he was forced by family pressure to marry Aria. He thought that he should hate her, should distance himself from her, and should make up for Isabella. After spending days and nights together, he didn't dare to admit that he had already fallen deeply in love with Aria. At this moment, Henry finally understood. Without Aria, his life would lose all its colors. "I thought I would stay abroad for a long time." But 2 years later, Dad was reappointed as the vice president of the group, and the internal crisis of the company had been resolved. Dad also won the lawsuit for the sexual harassment case, and the scandal about him disappeared in an instant. It wasn't just Uncle who helped Dad find evidence, but also Henry. When mentioning Henry, Dad's expression was very calm, and he didn't even frown. To Henry, Dad was both his former father-in-law and a benefactor who provided timely help. It seemed reasonable that he cared about Dad's situation. In spring, I returned to China with my parents. The original villa had already been auctioned off, and Dad took us to move into a villa in the suburbs. On the day Henry visited, there was a drizzle in the sky. He held a black umbrella and stood in front of the door. The fine raindrops wove a curtain between us, like a layer of light gauze. I remembered the first glance when I saw him. He stood among the crowd with an outstanding temperament. He was somewhat indistinct, like a precious treasure. As the years passed, he had lost a lot of weight. The sharpness he once had faded away, and now he was like a deep pool of water, calm and without ripples. When I saw him again, my heartbeat had already returned to normal. I stood under the eaves, put my hands in my pockets, and asked him with my head down, "What is General Manager Henry here for?" His voice was hoarse. "Arya. What I said about the divorce was on impulse. I was just angry that you sold all the gifts I gave you." I stared at him and said slowly, "Henry. You've said such angry words twice. The first time, I deceived myself and hid the divorce agreement. The second time, I summoned up my courage and divorced Henry." He frowned tightly, with confusion in his eyes. It seemed that the memory had dissipated in his mind. After all, he was drunk at that time. And that incident had already been 2 years ago. I said in a calm tone, "When you were drunk, you said that it was because of me that Isabella married someone else. The divorce agreement was written by you at that time. 2 years ago, I took this agreement and divorced you. Now we are strangers. If you want to talk business with my father, I can convey it for you." His face suddenly turned pale, his lips trembled slightly, and he struggled to utter a few words in an extremely low voice. "Arya, I came here specifically to find you. Since that's the case, then there's nothing to talk about." I took a few steps back and closed the door, using this door to block everything outside. The security guard told me that Henry had been standing outside the door all night long. Until Isabella came to look for him. On the third day after I returned to China, it happened that a friend in our circle was holding a charity auction. I accompanied several familiar wives in the circle to visit the exhibition, and Isabella was also among the crowd. She looked gloomy, wearing simple accessories, and huddled alone in the corner. No one was willing to pay attention to her. Henry had brought her home in a big way back then, making it known to everyone. She had intervened in someone else's marriage, and this matter was no longer a secret. People around avoided her and talked about her in private, saying that she was a mistress and forced me to leave. On such a formal occasion, she could only endure the cold stares alone. I ignored her and focused on the tiramisu in front of me. Elizabeth was chattering in my ear. "She has changed from the wife of a prodigal young master to the wife of a group executive. What else is she not satisfied with?" I thought for a moment and said, perhaps what she expected was more than just these. I handed Elizabeth a macaron. She sat down and enjoyed afternoon tea with me. The aroma of the desserts filled the air, adding a touch of warmth to this auction. Elizabeth couldn't calm down. After taking 2 bites, she ran off to take pictures. At this time, Isabella quietly approached with resentment in her tone. "Arya, it's all your fault." I was a bit confused. Blame me again? Although I was young and healthy, I couldn't bear so much responsibility. She continued, "If you hadn't married Henry back then, I could have been with him 5 years ago. I wouldn't have suffered so much, and he wouldn't have you in his heart. We wouldn't have ended up like this today, tired of each other." I pressed my temple, feeling a dull pain there. "Why don't you blame him?" This made her speechless for a moment. I said, "When the family went bankrupt, in order to turn the situation around, even if Henry didn't marry me, he would have chosen someone else. He took the position of the president of the Henry Group at the age of 27. This position is beyond the reach of many people even if they spend their whole lives striving for it. Those outstanding students who graduated in the same year as him are still working for him now. If he really wanted to marry you, no one could stop him. It's just that he couldn't let go of these fame and fortune. You should be grateful that he married someone as easygoing as me. If it were someone else, when you sent the first message to Henry, they would have made your affair known to everyone. In fact, when Henry helped her get out of her unhappy marriage, I was also glad for her and happy that she finally got out of the abyss of suffering. But gradually, I lost my liking for her. Because, like I used to be, she was too naive." I slowly finished saying these words, put down the dessert in my hand, and prepared to leave. Her eyes were red. She stood alone beside the flower bed, and tears kept falling. I had a great time. When I went home in the evening, Mom told me that several people had asked friends to inquire about my marriage. I said, I don't want to remarry. I had already experienced it once. There's nothing good about getting married. It will only bring a lot of troubles. You have to manage the household, support your husband's career, and also consider having children. If you don't choose the right person, you will also suffer a lot of grievances. Being alone is rather carefree and comfortable. Mom respected my idea and turned down all the introductions. I stayed at home, helped Mom take care of life, and occasionally went out to play with friends. Life was very pleasant. Henry often sent me things. Sometimes it was limited edition luxury goods, sometimes it was long handwritten letters. I returned these things intact. On an ordinary night, Isabella suddenly visited. She had lost a lot of weight and looked haggard. It was cold outside, but I still let her come in. She apologized with teary eyes. I was really stupid before. I'm sorry for what I did to you back then. I looked calm and handed her a pack of tissues to wipe her tears. She said that Henry just supported her but often didn't come home. She was in the mansion, ignored by everyone, and felt depressed every day. Back then, Henry didn't keep his promise to marry her. Now, he also ignored her. She sobbed and said, I hate him so much. I propped my cheek up and listened, not knowing how to comment on this relationship. As long as she didn't transfer her resentment to me. Isabella seemed to have held it in for a long time and poured out her feelings to me nonstop. I was so sleepy listening to her. Finally, she asked cautiously, Can you forgive me? It was me who competed with you for a man back then, took your husband away, and made you sad. I really know that I was wrong. After thinking for a moment, I replied, Whatever. I'll forgive you when you've repaired my wedding dress. Half a year later, Isabella sent my wedding dress back. The torn lace had been replaced with a more delicate one, and the tiny pearls were sewn back one by her with the help of others. All the damages had been repaired as good as new. It was quite nice. At least during the half year of repairing the wedding dress, she wouldn't be too bored and wouldn't spend all day thinking about whether Henry loved her or not. During this period, two major events also took place. Firstly, the girl who framed my father for sexual harassment was sentenced, and my father returned to the position of president. Secondly, because of a failed decision-making, the board of directors unanimously decided to ask Henry to step down as president and he was transferred to the Southern Branch Company. I wasn't surprised. He had been rising rapidly in the business world since he entered it. Things had been too smooth for him. It was inevitable that he would underestimate his opponents, lack caution, and be prone to making mistakes. Before setting off, he came to find me again. Just like in the beginning. I stood on the marble steps of the mansion and looked at him. He stood below, looking rather reserved. He looked up at me and said, I'm going to California and may stay there for many years. Does this count as atonement? I didn't like to hear that. No. It's because of your own wrong decision-making that you've ended up in this situation. It has nothing to do with me. I turned around and left. Isabella was about to follow Henry to the south. Here, she was all alone, and I was the only one who came to see her off. She sat in an ordinary commercial vehicle, rolled down the window, and looked at me. The light in her eyes was dim. I knew what she was worried about. The California branch had always been rumored to be a difficult place, and it was hard to come back once you went there. This departure meant an uncertain future. I comforted her softly, Don't worry too much. California is actually quite nice. There are lots of fruits in California, and they are delicious. They are all things that can't be found in the north. She curved the corners of her lips and smiled. Her gentleness and radiance reminded me of how she looked when we first met. Tears slid down from the corners of her eyes again. Thank you, Arya. I was in the North City studying and furthering my education. I took the MBA program and also learned flower arrangement and oil painting. My father didn't stay in the head office all the time. Later he volunteered to go to the branch company. I helped my father and also accompanied him to live in various places, experiencing all the prosperity in China. I would never be entangled in those trifles anymore. Henry also achieved some results in California, but we never met again. Several years later, I received a message from Isabella. She had spent 10 years in marriage with Henry and finally chose to end this relationship. She was different from me. She didn't have a family background and could only rely on Henry. She had always been smart. Relying on Henry's resources, she quickly learned to do business. With her own career, she finally had the courage to break free from the past and start an independent life. I think that's quite good. There is still a long way to go in the future, and we all have the opportunity to start anew.